This is Tyler O'Neill with the Daily Signal. Honored to be joined by EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin. Great to see you. So I want to hear you just go off. You did earlier in front of the New York Times, but the legacy media bias in claiming that you have no evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse is just astounding. And I want you to talk a little bit about that.
You know, what's interesting, as we've gotten further along with providing more specific evidence, they only start digging in even further into the narrative that there is no evidence. And, it's irresponsible. I have a duty to make sure that I'm implementing a zero tolerance policy for any waste and abuse. I don't want a penny of any tax dollar to get wasted. So for us, we're going through the confirmation process, and this video comes out of a Biden EPA political appointee talking about how they are throwing gold bars off the Titanic. And to me, when I hear that, okay, the gold bars are tax dollars. Off the Titanic means that they know that they're wasting it. How much are they trying to throw off the Titanic? Well, his words, not mine, is that they're trying to get billions of dollars out the door before Inauguration Day. And oh, by the way, also mentioning how they are trying to get themselves jobs at the recipient NGOs. So members of Congress are asking me, if confirmed, will you find out what this video is about, what they're talking about, get to the bottom of it, find these gold bars to restore accountability? Yes, Senator. Now, that happens to be the attitude that is a majority of Congress. The minority right now in Congress doesn't want me to ask any questions. The minority in Congress just wants me to adopt the position that it is impossible that even a dollar could be wasted or abused, that they were going to put out tens of billions of dollars and there's just nothing to see here. Every time you find something, they're going to only dig in further. So we come in and we find out that what they did was set up a system towards the end of the Biden administration, the second half of the year, where they put $20 billion at an outside bank. It was going through 8 pass-through entities. That many of those NGOs were brand new. The one, Power Forward Communities, for example, $2 billion. This was that Stacey Abrams linked NGO. And they're all pass-throughs. They only received $100 in 2023. They get $2 billion in 2024. You're looking at who's affiliated with all of these NGOs, and it's former Biden officials, former Obama administration officials, Democratic donors. You're seeing all sorts of examples of self-dealing and conflicts of interest. I have a problem with that. Then I realize just how badly they are unqualified, like saying inside of the grant agreement that the recipient receiving billions of dollars has 90 days to complete a training called How to Develop a Budget. And it's not like this language was put in there because they have to. The Biden EPA decided that they had to. They had to put something inside the grant agreement to make sure that these individuals would know how to develop a budget. But here's where it gets even worse. On page 1 of the grant agreement, it says that they have 21 days. The first 21 days of that 90-day period, they have 21 days to start spending the money. So you have a problem with unqualified recipients. But what about reduced oversight? EPA isn't even a party to the account control agreements of these subrecipients. So all the money goes through these pass-throughs, and the EPA is reducing oversight. That members of Congress can ask me what happens to this money and that money from these funds once it goes through the pass-through entities. And I say, I don't know. At the beginning of March, we sent a letter of all sorts of questions to the 8 prime recipients that you would be shocked that EPA wouldn't know and would have to actually ask these questions. Well, that's pretty wild to us. They were amending account control agreements right up until Inauguration Day. It was 1 week before the inauguration on January 13th when the account control agreements were getting amended for a few of the recipients. And this gets to that back and forth that you witnessed at EPA headquarters. I said, well, why don't you look at footnote 7 on page 29, where the judge is saying that there wasn't account control agreements getting amended after the election. So this idea that we're just going to ignore all of the evidence, that we're just going to dig in further every time we overturn one new rock and uncover more evidence, is just the height of irresponsibility. And I refuse to waste tax dollars. And it doesn't matter what any member of Congress or any member of the media tries to shout from the rooftops to try to intimidate us otherwise. It is our pledge to every other member of Congress and every American who demands us to be responsible with their money. And it's really a shame that there are some in the media that who want to carry the water for these entities in this system, which is really something that we've left in the dustbin of history. Those grants are done. I've terminated those grants. So everyone who reaches out saying that we need to let this money flow, you understand, the grants are terminated and we're not changing our mind.
So on that line, you released a list of 100 actions the EPA has taken in the first 100 days, things that actually are addressing clean air, clean water. I think many of these green NGOs that are so focused on climate change, the specter of the world ending, that they're not focused on the more concrete issues. How do you see, the previous administration, which seemed ever more emphasis on that climate industrial complex and not very much on the concrete issues on the ground? How is the sea change in your tenure at the EPA?
I'm glad you're pointing this out. So on the 100th day in the morning, we released a list of 100 environmental actions that the Trump EPA took in the first 100 days. That is a big environmental action once per day on average. And we want to keep that pace. We believe that we can protect the environment and grow the economy. We're committed towards choosing both, and we do so unapologetically. And there are some who are out there saying that we have to strangulate the economy in order to protect the environment. We reject that notion. It's not a binary choice. There are some who get behind particular terms, and they'll define their terms in a way that they might be able to build bipartisan support. For example, the term environmental justice. They'll say that there's a community that has been left behind that needs help dealing with an environmental issue. Okay, that's something that has my attention. What do we need to do to make sure that we are helping this community so that they can have clean air, land, and water like every other American? So that's the way they define their term. What are they doing with it? Well, we need an appropriation for Congress, they say, in order to deal with it. Okay, how much money do you need? They'll ask for tens of billions of dollars. How are we going to spend it? Now, you would think that the right way to spend a dollar, if you're going to spend a dollar on what they defined as environmental justice, would be on remediating that environmental issue. But no, instead what they do is they spend that dollar on a left-wing organization to tell us, hey, Congress, hey, EPA, we should be spending the next dollar on directly remediating that environmental issue. We refuse to be funding left-wing organizations to tell us where we should be spending money. And here's the thing. We're not looking to take money from left-wing organizations to give them to right-wing activist organizations. We're looking at being responsible stewards of tax dollars, period. If you're going to spend a dollar on remediating an environmental issue, then that dollar should be spent on directly remediating that environmental issue, period. No exceptions.
Tyler, final question if you have one.
Yeah, so on the issue of climate change, there's this specter. I think your EPA is looking at the evidence, trying to figure out exactly what we know. They claim that there's this scientific consensus that the world's going to end if we don't stop doing carbon emissions. I don't know if it was yesterday or 10 years ago or 30 years ago. They always change what the actual disaster is. How do you approach the issue, and how do you think the EPA should approach it?
Well, first off, so much of what we're working on is non-controversial. When President Trump talks about clean air, land, and water for all Americans, this is something that shouldn't be a wedge issue, that one party is for clean air, land, and water and the other one isn't. Because I know so many conservatives who believe passionately, strongly, they fight for clean air, land, and water. This is something that a very large majority, and by the way, I'd be shocked, whenever you meet any American who says that they're not for clean air, land, and water, it's like, what's wrong with you? But there are people who are trying to turn this into a wedge issue. So they'll take the term climate change. We're just talking about defining the word environmental justice. So they try to define the term climate change. Well, what are they trying to do with it? Well, where I was talking about tens of billions of dollars in funding in the name of environmental justice, they'll push for trillions of dollars, tens of trillions of dollars, as we see in their Green New Deal resolution and their vision, their plan, tens of trillions of dollars. This isn't about just taxing the wealthy to pay for it. You can confiscate take all of the assets of the wealthiest Americans and still not have enough to fund what they're trying to do in the name of climate change. You're going to bankrupt people who can least afford it. I'm from a state like New York where policies that they come out, they ban gas hookups in new construction. They won't allow the safe extraction of natural gas. They won't approve new pipelines. They want to ban the sale of gas-powered vehicles. They talk about wind, which is an intermittent source, as if it's a substitute for baseload power. Who do you think all of this stuff hurts the most? The people who can least afford it. And Americans spoke loudly and clearly last November with economic concerns that transcend partisan loyalty. They elected Donald Trump. They put in this Trump mandate, they put this team across all of these different agencies to deliver on that mandate. So yes, our core mission is protecting human health and the environment. Yes, at EPA, we're going to fulfill all statutory obligations, but we will choose both. We will grow the economy. We'll address these economic concerns of all Americans. And I just want to say, last but not least, to the first question that you asked, and I'm glad you were there a week and a half ago. I just went through a list of all sorts of different specific things of why we were concerned about self-dealing and conflicts of interest, unqualified recipients, reduced oversight. What do you call all of those specifics that were just referenced?
Corruption.
I'll call it evidence. I'll call it evidence of waste and abuse. And I'm going to be coming to Congress here over the course of the next couple weeks. We are going to be testifying before Congress in the House and the Senate for budget hearings. And I look forward to answering the questions of members of Congress. But I'll tell you what, if you haven't been warned somehow up to now, let it be known now that we are going to stand rock solid with the American taxpayer here in this process. We're going to make sure that the agency is operating as efficiently as possible. We don't want one more or one less than what we need to fulfill our statutory obligations and to accomplish our mission and our Powering the Great American Comeback initiative. But we will not be bullied and intimidated into wasting taxpayer dollars. We're proud of that. And if anyone wants to try to take us to the carpet, well, you better spend some quality time in your own prep looking under those rocks that we've looked under because we're not having any of it.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Subscribe to get the news the legacy media won't tell you and only the Daily Signal can bring to you.